Um, so the presentation is entitled FreeNAS, a great choice for a home server. And what we're going to try to cover today is my history with home servers, the features of my current system, both software and hardware. I'll talk about FreeBSD, which is the operating system that FreeNAS runs on, how to get and install FreeNAS, and then maintaining FreeNAS. We won't have time really to spend much detail about sharing files with PCs, remote connections, PC backups, or media server, but we'll get as far as we can. So in 2008, I bought a copy of Windows Home Server. I think it was about $100. I put it on a machine that I had put together myself, and I loved it. It had oodles of features. It was great. And in about 2012, Microsoft came along with Windows Home Server 2011, which I think I paid $50 for, which is quite a bargain because it's based on Windows Server 2008 R2. And I used that up until this past January. I would probably continue to be using it, except that it ran out of security updates, much like Windows 7. And Microsoft did not have an upgrade path that was cost effective and had all the features that this product had. Again, I loved it. It had three main features. Well, I'll just talk about all of them that I ended up using to see what I needed to replace. So the operating system was Windows Home Server 2011, and natively that supported sharing files across my network. So it's a network attached storage like a Synology or a QNAP or something like that. In addition, it had a feature to do client backups on a regular basis for all the Windows PCs that I had connected on my local area network. Had remote access features, so I could go anywhere and use a browser to get connected back to my home network. I could get my shared files, and I could also remotely connect to any of my user PCs. It also had a server backup feature, which would run, I had it set up to do once a day to an external USB drive. And both the client and the server backups would recover individual files or folders or recover from bare metal problems. So if a client hard drive died completely, I could pop a blank one in there, boot a recovery disk on that system, and get back to the last backup that I made on my Windows Home Server. This Windows Home Server 2011 needed a product to add a feature that was on Windows Home Server, but they had dropped it in this one. That was to combine all the hard drives that you had into one pool and use them as one large drive. So I did have that add-on. I was able to run PowerShoot from APC to monitor and control my uninterruptible power supply. And I'd recommend putting all your PCs in addition to any servers on a UPS, just to take care of low voltage, high voltage surges and spikes and whatever. It really comes in very handy. I had a program called Marks Updater that ran on it that provided dynamic DNS, which would keep track of an address that I could use to access my home server, even though I have a dynamic IP address from my ISP, which is now Comcast, but was Verizon. And finally, because it was a Windows system, I was able to run Logitech Media Server, which served music files to various squeezebox radios that I have around the home. So this is what I needed to replace, and this is what I came up with. So I'm going to use FreeNAS. I'm at version 11.3 now. It has native sharing of server message block, or also called common internet file system to share files throughout my local area network. I found a program called VM Agent for Windows, which is enterprise quality. It's free. It's from a German company to do client backups on a regular basis. And again, you can use that to restore at the file or folder level or from a bare metal restore if you need it. Remote access, I was able to use a feature in my ASUS router. They have OpenVPN there, which if we get time we'll talk about, but I love this router, and that gets me back to my local area network no matter where I am, as long as I have an internet connection. Serves as a VPN and also will let me remote access any of my client PCs. For server backups, I run a thing called Karen's Replicator on one of my user PCs, and that will back up the data files from my FreeNAS server. FreeNAS has a built-in plugin that uses a program called Network UPS Tools, or NUT, to do the monitoring of the UPS. And what that will do is, if there is a power failure, it will check the battery level, and when it gets dangerously low, it will tell the server to shut down and not give me problems with the file system. The dynamic DNS updates are handled by my ASUS router. And finally, I'm able to run Logitech Media Server in essentially a virtual machine on my FreeNAS. So FreeNAS is shepherded by a company called IX Systems. IX Systems does hardware and FreeNAS systems for quite large companies. They have, I forget how many terabyte systems they can sell. The smallest system that they sell with hardware is about $1,000. And they take care of the open source end of it, of FreeNAS. The product that they sell with support to enterprise is called TrueNAS, and indeed the next version of FreeNAS is going to be called TrueNAS Core. So if you wait a while and then try to find FreeNAS, you'll be pointed to TrueNAS Core. So they make FreeNAS available for free. It's free open source software to home users, and it's really great. There's an active set of forums there. There's documentation there, and we'll see some of that. FreeNAS, of course, runs on an operating system, and the operating system it uses is FreeBSD, which is a Unix-like system. So let me just pull up a Unix family tree. If you remember the 70s, AT&T Bell Labs developed Unix in the early 70s, and soon after it started, Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley got a license from AT&T and have continued to work on their BSD, their Berkeley software distribution. At the same time, AT&T kept up with it and licensed various companies. You'll see Silicon Graphics were selling IRIX, IBM was selling AIX, HP was selling HPUX, Sun was selling Solaris, and AT&T made it available also. They continue, some of those continue to today. On the other side, Xenix and GNU were developed, and then Linux was developed. Now, these aren't direct derivatives from Unix, but they are Unix-like in that they all work similarly. They're command line driven. You'll notice that from BSD, Sun got a license for BSD and developed Sun OS. Steve Jobs and Next developed Next Step, which then became OS X at Apple. And from BSD is where OpenBSD, NetBSD, and then FreeBSD developed. So FreeBSD, the one at the top, is what we're using under FreeNAS. And you'll notice that Linux is on here too. Many of you may be familiar with Linux, maybe even Linux gurus. A lot of the commands are very similar, but they're not exactly the same. So if you decide to jump in and try FreeNAS and FreeBSD, you might want to just consult with the documentation before you make a mess of things. All right, so FreeBSD is available at freebsd.org. Again, they have a lot of documentation. They have a community there of people that are happy to help you if you have a problem. There's active development with frequent updates. And you do not have to load this separately because FreeNAS includes it with their distribution of FreeNAS. So obviously the software has to run on hardware. FreeBSD runs on a wide variety of hardware, everywhere from enterprise motherboards with Xeon chips and ECC memory down to consumer level motherboards with non-ECC memory. You can probably try FreeBSD or FreeNAS with something that you have left over. I chose to put it on a system with an ASUS motherboard. I'm not saying this is the best system, and again, some of these are probably not available anymore because there's always a rapid turnover. So the ASUS motherboard accepts my Core i5-6600 CPU. I have memory in there, 24 gig of memory. There's 4 slots. I have 2 4s and 2 8s. I will tell you that FreeNAS loves memory. It makes RAM disk essentially in there to use as read and write caches, and the more the merrier. So even though it may say as a minimum perhaps 8 gigabytes, if you can afford more, that's great. Disks in there, the boot disk will not hold any of your data, your shared data, and none of your data disks can serve as a boot disk. So as far as booting goes, you can either use a flash drive or a pair of flash drives that are mirrored, or an SSD or mirrored SSDs. I have one Samsung SSD 256 gigabyte inside. I think the minimum is something like 8 gigabytes again. As far as data disks, I have 4 2 terabyte drives in there. They're Western Digital Red series. Western Digital sells different series depending on the use. Red is their series recommended for NAS usage because generally speaking, the disks are spinning 24/7. And I will caution you, if you're buying Reds, the disk manufacturers have switched from, we'll call them common magnetic recording disks, to another system called SMR, shingled magnetic recording. And that doesn't play well with NAS systems. And so Western Digital rebranded their Red series drives that are using CMR to Red Plus. So if you're buying new Red disks now, you want to make sure they're Red Pluses, or make sure that they're CMR drives. The motherboard I have did not have enough SATA ports for my 4 data disks, so I had to buy another controller. I bought a StarTech 4-port PCIe SATA 3 6 gigabit system. It supports RAID. FreeNAS works better when it has lowest level access to the disks, and so it will work with RAID, hardware RAID, but it works better without it. So I have not used the hardware RAID on this particular controller. The motherboard has a 1 gigabit Ethernet Intel connection built in on the motherboard, so I didn't need to buy a separate board. I kept my same uninterruptible power supply. The UPS is from APC, and the router I have is an ASUS AC86U. If I didn't mention that I love it, I love it. It has so many features. So let's look at some of these hardware pieces. So here's a page about the motherboard. Again, I think it's been superseded by 270 or even a 370, but this is not necessarily the best one. It should work with most any. It does need 64-bit motherboard. So I said I have a Core i5-6600 in there. I have 4 G.Skill Ripjaws memory, again for a total of 24 gigabits. This is a picture of my Samsung SSD, which is only used for booting. And here's one of the Western Digital RED drives. Again, it does not say RED Plus on the label here, but this is an older picture. So I put a note on this slide to make sure you get CMR, not SMR. This is a picture of the controller. You can see it plugs in and then has connections, SATA connections on the card for up to 4 drives. Of course, you'll need to put that somewhere, a case and a power supply. I happen to have this around, but you know, you'll need one of your own. And as far as installing it, you will need to have a keyboard, mouse, and monitor. Once we get it installed, FreeNAS is headless. It does not need a monitor, a keyboard, or a mouse. You'll need something to load FreeNAS from. It could be a USB drive with the image on it, or a disk. If you're going to use a disk, as I did, you might want to put either temporarily or permanently an optical drive in there. I've left mine in there because that's what I would use if I need to reinstall it or for other purposes. This is the UPS that I have on a different system, but any of the APC UPSs that have sufficient power for it should be fine to use. So let's go back to look at where to get FreeNAS. So freenas.org is probably hosted at IX Systems, and it's a great website. It has all kinds of documentation for it and suggestions. It has a community there, again, with people that are just happy to help you. There's a lot of discussion about what it would be used for that you can see here. One of the main links at the top is FreeNAS at Home. They mention why you might want to use it to consolidate files, stream movies and music. It can give you plenty of storage if you do into that kind of thing, and let you do backup. So FreeNAS does not include this backup piece to run on your client PCs, but it will provide the storage for whatever you choose to use. Again, I said that it has a lot of documentation. There's a really complete user guide in there that talks about in great detail about how to configure it, how to run it, how to recover from problems, and so on. One of the key things about FreeNAS is the file system that it uses that comes with FreeBSD, and that is ZFS. So one thing about ZFS is it's a 128-bit file system. I guarantee you will never run out of room because it will support up to 16 exabytes. So an exabyte, if you look down this table, is equal to 1 billion gigabytes. So ZFS will handle up to 16 billion gigabytes, and we're a long way from there. So ZFS is a very interesting file system. It basically, if it was a person, it would have as its prime directive to never, ever lose one of your files. And it has a lot of features that make sure your data is safe. So it's transactional, which means that all those little pieces of back and forth that you need to do for a write, like getting a a directory entry and then getting free blocks and then writing the data to the blocks and then updating the directory and so on, are treated as one unit, and it's only when all of those are completely done that it marks it as complete and finished. And if it fails partway through there for some reason, it's all backed out, so your file system is always consistent. One of the things it does is called copy on write, or COW. Copy on write means anytime it does writing, it always writes to free blocks. So if you had a file that you were going to edit, and you did some editing at the end of it, and it only changed that last block, when it went to write it out, it would get new block or blocks from the free block space, and write that new data to that block, change the file pointers in the directory to point to that block, and then would delete the old last block and return that to free blocks. And what that means is if it fails partway through, you still have the original data in the original blocks, and when it backs out that transaction, your file system is still convenient, and you still have the data there from before you made the edit. It's self-healing. Every time it writes data, it makes a checksum for each block and stores that. When it reads the data, it compares the checksum from the block it read to know whether the block was consistent. It does monthly what they call scrubs, which essentially goes through and reads every block to make sure that something hasn't gotten bit rot. It supports SMART, as you'll see. So it's really a great file system, and it should do everything possible to keep you from losing anything. So let's see how the file system is put together. So you start out with raw disks on the top of this drawing. Disks are combined into VDEVs, or virtual devices, and there's many ways we can do that, and I'll talk about that in a minute. One or more virtual devices are combined into pools, and then pools can get subdivided into one or more file systems called data sets, or ZVols. I've not used ZVols, but they're there if you want it. Now, VDEV types. So you can divide them into one of two categories, either redundant or non-redundant. Non-redundant could be single disks. So if I had 6 1 terabyte drives, I could put them in there as 6 1 terabyte VDEVs, and I would have 6 terabytes of storage. And the problem is that if one of those disks were to fail, I would lose whatever was on that. I could also combine them by striping them, which means write part of a file on each of 2 or more disks. And that has performance benefits, but again, if you lose any one disk, your data is gone. So most people would choose redundant type of VDEVs, and there are 2 types of those, either mirrored or RAID-Z. RAID-Z is essentially a software RAID that's unique to ZFS. So a mirrored setup would be take 2 disks, treat them as one, and every time you write to one, write the same thing to the second disk. That way, the second disk is always a copy of the first one, and if there's a problem reading a file from the first one, you still have a good copy on the second one. If you had 6 1 terabyte drives and you mirrored them, you'd only have 3 terabytes of storage available. RAID-Z comes in at least 3 flavors: RAID-Z1, RAID-Z2, RAID-Z3. Where RAID-Z1, you can lose one. It requires 3 disks, and you can lose any one of them, not lose any data. With RAID-Z2, it needs at least 4 disks, and you can lose any 2. And as you might imagine, RAID-3, Z3 requires 5 disks, and you can lose any 3 of them until you get it replaced. I have chosen RAID-Z1. When you start to configure your NFS FreeNAS system, it will make suggestions based on the disks that it can see when it starts up. So when you install it, it doesn't do anything with the data drives. That's only installing it on the boot disk. And then when you start FreeNAS, it asks you how you want to combine them. Okay, so let's move on. I'll just talk about the storage ramifications of RAID Z. Again, we're going to read this drawing from right to left. I already mentioned if you have a 1 terabyte drive that you make one VDEV out of, you have 1 terabyte of storage. If you get 2 drives and you mirror them, you really only still get 1 terabyte of storage. If you stripe 3 drives, you have 3 terabytes of storage, but again, that's not redundant. If you took those same 3 1 terabyte drives and combined them into RAID Z1, you'd end up with not 3 terabytes, but 2 terabytes. So like everything engineering, it's a trade-off. I think for most people, RAID Z1 is a good balance, especially if you back up from the server, and you should, because again, it won't protect you from theft or fire if you don't have something other than what's just built in. All right, so when you start to install FreeNAS, you'll see a screen like this. This is FreeBSD asking you what you want to do. You're going to pick item 1, boot multi-user. That will then boot in the FreeNAS distribution and see this screen, and you'll pick item 1 to install it. It will then ask you where you want to put the system itself. This screenshot shows a lot of little flash drives. I tried to find a better one, but I couldn't. Yours with data disks will probably see multiple large drives and 1 small drive. And you'll pick that and then let it do its thing. It'll install it and then boot it up. Now, at that point, you can shut down the system, disconnect your mouse and your keyboard and your monitor, and then boot it back up, and then go over to one of your client computers and start a browser up and browse to the FreeNAS server. You'll see this screen, or a screen that looks like this. The default screen is a dashboard, and the dashboard gives you a quick glance to just see what's happening here. So we see a block for the system with the version and how long it's been up, its name. There's a link there to check for updates. This is updated frequently, every 2 months, perhaps 2 or 3 months. There's a block for the CPU that shows you the CPU load. There's a block on memory. And I'll point out the yellow section of the memory block here shows what's used for ZFS caching, and that's about 21 gigabytes out of 24 gigabytes. It loves memory. There's a block on storage, and that defaults to pool. You can then drill on down. It shows you which the VDEVs make up the pool, and you can drill down to disks and so on inside it. On the left, you'll see a number of links, and as you can tell, this is a very rich file server here. You have many more options than a man needs, probably, or a woman. I have not used everything that's available, but it's nice to know that it's there. This powers some really large businesses, and so you would you can find almost anything you want here. So let's look at some of these choices on the left. So the first one, just at random, I picked NTP servers. So this is a way to provide network time on your local area network. If you have a device that looks for an NTP server to get its clock set, you can point it towards FreeNAS, and FreeNAS uses 3 servers from ntp.org to get the correct time on there. Servers, as you know, love to have the right time, so this isn't a surprise. We're going to go down one to the boot section, and this has a list of boot options on your boot disk. The one that you have currently booted from will say now/reboot on there. And as you can see, I'm on 11.3 update 1. You can keep as many of these previous versions as you wish. If we were to install upgrade 11.3-U2 and have some sort of problem with it, I could go to this screen and then go back and reboot to update 1 until it got solved or I figured out what was wrong. When you don't need any of these anymore, you can go through and delete them by using the little 3 dots all the way at the right edge. Alert services, it will email you if certain things happen that need to be alerted about. So if there's a UPS problem, a power fail, so on, it can email you. If there's a problem with the disk, the scrub found some problem, it can email you. There's many, many more things. You can say which you want to have an alert for and which you don't. Again, if you're in the same room, it's maybe not so useful, but if this is a server that you have maybe in your parents' basement and you use it, it'd be nice to know from afar. Periodic snapshot tasks. Snapshots are wonderful things. They make use of that copy on write that I told you about. So when you write a new file, then it eventually goes back and deletes the old blocks. Well, a snapshot essentially makes a copy of all of the file pointers now at one point in time and saves those as if it were still in use, so that you can return to that point if you needed to. Now, you can set the timing for this. I have 3 data sets on here: ClickArt, music, and users. ClickArt, I think I do a snapshot once every 6 months, perhaps. Music once a month, and users once a day, every night at midnight. And you'll see how useful that becomes in a Windows environment. So I'll get back to that. This is the network tab on the left, and you can see all of your interfaces. I only have one here. You can see its IP version 4 address. I blurred out the IP version 6 address and some other things on some of these slides just because they're personal and I don't want you pinging me. So let's move down to pools. Pools are collections of VDEVs. You can see that I have one pool here, pool 1. It's 4 terabytes large, and that has some data sets in it. It has backups, and then ClickArt, music, and users. ClickArt, music, and users we've already seen on the snapshot page. Backups, as you might imagine, is what gets used for my PC backups. And there's a 5th one there called IOCage. IOCage is used for a thing called jails. Jails are more or less virtual machines where you can put other pieces of software in. They might be prepackaged, or you could install your own on there. And you can see I have LMS Quarry running in one jail. That's my Logitech media server. We might talk about that if we have time. Snapshots, this is a list of snapshots. So the other page was setting it up. This is snapshots that were made. And if you look at the times on the users, when I made this screenshot, that was back in April. It's every day from this April 6th, April 5th, April 4th, 3rd, 2nd, and so on at midnight. And music was April the 5th, and the previous one was March 31st. And ClickArt was on March 31st, and then that was it. These will accumulate until your retention period, which I think I have set for a year. Snapshots are not like full backups. They're very inexpensive in the sense that they don't take much disk space, and so it should be easy to keep a large number of these around. Next is disks. You can see I have 5 in here. 4 of them are the Western Digital Reds, and the last one is the boot disk, the Samsung. Let's move on down to SMB. Now, on the left, under sharing, you can see that this FreeNAS supports Apple sharing with AFP, iSCSI sharing, NFS shares, so you can share it on a Unix system. You can do WebDAV shares, or SMB if you want to share to a Windows system. So that's the only thing I need to configure, and that's why the others are not set up on my machine. You can set up to share any of those data sets that you have pre-configured up in the storage area. Let's come down to services. There are a lot of services you can turn on or off. I'm using Smart, so that's turned on. If you're using SMB, you have to turn that on. If you were using AFP, it's at the top of the screen, we can't see, you'd have to turn that on. And the one that's highlighted, UPS, is the uninterruptible power supply monitor, so that's on. Next are plugins. These are pre-configured packages that you can just click and install and make use of them. You might recognize Plex on there. It's a media server. There's antivirus. There's a Secret Backup, which is allegedly very good. Jails, I mentioned Jails. That's where my media server is stored. Reporting, there's lots of reporting. You can look and see a system load over time. There are many other choices for CPU. This is one of the disk choices, disk I/O over time. There are lots of others on each of the disks. This is a network report. And I'm going to then jump down to Shell. So Shell gives you a way to access FreeBSD directly. You can see at the top it's saying that we're working under FreeBSD 11.3, release P6, and you can put in any FreeBSD command line here, command. Again, it will be rare when you need to use this. I did need to use it to install my Logitech Media service. So let me see where we are. Okay, I'm now going to pop over to a client machine, and I have gone to find Corey, which is the name of my server, under network, and on the bottom left you'll see we can see backups, click art, music, and users, and those are the shares that I had set up under SMB. Under users, I've expanded that, and you'll see there's a .recycle folder there. Don is the main set of shared data, but I've configured FreeNAS to set up this recycle bin, which, like in Windows, you can, before you delete a file on that server, wherever it is, it'll copy it into recycle before deleting it from its normal place. So if you have an oops moment, you can go back and find an old copy of it. Wonderful. I couldn't do that before with Windows Home Server. If I deleted it by mistake, it was gone. Okay, this is now in File Explorer. I drilled down into that users, Don, and down on into my file structure there, and I've highlighted on one of the files, database update addresses.php. And it's dated, as you can see there, May 1st at 7:51. It's a PHP file. What I've done then is right-clicked it and selected properties from the context menu. And if you've ever looked at properties of a file, you'll see it shows up with another window in the General tab. If previous versions are available, that tab will be eliminated, and I've clicked on previous versions. And you'll see that I have earlier copies of the same file. So the one that I would get directly is from May 1st, but I have copies from April 29th, April 27th, April 23rd, April 19th, the 18th, the 17th, and still more down below there if I use the elevator to scroll down. Again, this was something that was not available in Windows Home Server 2011, and it's really great for one of those oops moments. If you get yourself into a big hole and you say, gee, I just want to go back, you can either restore it or you can open it. So if I'm using a editor, I can open the current one, I can open the previous one, I can look for differences, I can put both of those files into a file differencing program and just see what I've done to make such a mess of it. All right, let's just look one more place. This is, again, inside the recycle bin, and you can see we're drilling down to Don downloads Windows 10 Ping Plotter. These are installation packages for Ping Plotter, which I have deleted. If I deleted one, I got a new version, and the new version had some deficiency, and I wanted the old one, I could go back here, recover it, and return to the old version without any trouble. All right, I think I have about 5 more minutes. We can breeze through some other things. Again, to fully replace my Windows Home Server, I needed to have some other features available to work in conjunction with FreeNAS. So here's my ASUS router, which I love, if I haven't mentioned that. And one of the things that has on it is, among this whole list of things, is VPN support. It has both an OpenVPN client and an OpenVPN server. We're going to look at OpenVPN server, which is here under the VPN tab on the left-hand column, about 3/4 of the way down. When I click on that and open up the details, there are 3 choices: point-to-point tunneling protocol, OpenVPN, and also IPsec. So I'm using OpenVPN. The green switch there says I've enabled it. And that's basically all you need to do. You can go down and find the line that says, roughly in the middle, it says export OpenVPN configuration file. You'll need that for the programs that you're going to install on your clients that you're going to take to some faraway place. So you'll click that, download a file, and then we need a way to find our local area network. And for that, we need to have a domain name that points to our possibly changing IP address. I've set up 2 of them, and I need another one too. The router will enable a DDNS client, and what this says is send a particular packet to this website whenever the IP address of the local, the wide area network address changes of the network we're connected to. So this is going to tell a place called www.dnsomatic.com. And DNSomatic is run by OpenDNS, which you might have heard of. If you need to change more than one service, you can't do it on my router, and DNSomatic will do any number that you have. So I have change IP, no IP, and also OpenDNS. They all get told when I have a new address. I blurred out my WAN address, but it's 69. whatever from Comcast. Change IP, there are free accounts that will let you do it. I can then go to my domain name, which is some combination of arrowsmith.changeip.net, or there's other choices. And if you try to go there, you'll then go to my actual current IP address. The same with no IP. They're free accounts, and I got 2 just to back up the other one. OpenDNS lets you filter DNS requests from your local area network depending on what you want filtered out, like porn, guns, malware, whatever. But they need to know your local external IP address. And so that's why I have to tell them where I am. It's also free. I have no filtering other than just malware right now. OpenVPN clients, these are free for each device. You can go and download one for Windows, and I have one on my laptop. You can go to the Apple Store or Android's Google Store and download app for that, and both our smartphones have that located on it. Again, there's a community at OpenVPN, and it's very useful. All right, well, I think we're getting close to the end, so I'm going to only mention briefly VM, which is a German company. It makes an excellent product for backing up Windows clients. It works back as far as Windows 7, I think, and what you can do is schedule backups. Here is it's being named. This is the mode, the entire computer. I'm going to store it on a shared folder. That shared folder is on Cori Backups. You might have seen that in an earlier slide. I have a separate subfolder for this particular client called Berman. It does need credentials. I put in my username and password there. You can set up the schedule. I'm going to back up, do a full backup every Saturday. I'm going to back up every day at 12:30, and I'm going to do an incremental backup at that point. And then you can just put it into place. And it has a monitor there where you can see how it's going. You can restore it from any of the incremental or full backup dates. And so far, so good. Haven't lost anything yet. Let me just move on down to the slide with the links on. Again, this will be posted, and you can go there and find anything that I was not able to cover or wasn't clear about today. And other than that, thanks for coming, and I'll take questions if you have any.
Okay, Don, there are some questions and I believe some comments. The first one is GNU and Minix do not share any code from Research Unix. They were inspired, yes, but no code is derived from it.
Yes, that's true. They're all, I have them on the same slide. They're Unix-like systems, even though they were not, in the case of Unix and the other one, they were not derived directly from it. They were made to work similarly and use similar commands.
Okay. The next one is a question. Why would a techie want a system like this compared, say, to a NAS drive or drives in a RAID cabinet attached to one's router, or even a multi-drive USB cabinet with RAID?
Well, you can see that this is the same thing as that network attached storage unit, but it has extra features on there. So I'm able to run my Logitech media server as well as other things on there if I wanted to. There's a wide range of plugins they have available. So it's up to you what you end up choosing to do. A lot of people use QNAP. A lot of people use Synergy. A lot of people attach either freestanding USB drives or a NAS rack onto their router or other device. But this is what I chose to do.
And then this is kind of related to the previous question. Couldn't all of this be achieved by getting a NAS device?
Well, I would say this is a NAS device, but I like to build things. And I know what's in it. I know how it's hooked together. If there's a problem, I know how to work on it, how to fix it. There's nothing proprietary in here. If somebody else wants to do it a different way, God bless them. This is just what I chose to do.
And then there is another question. Will FreeNAS run on Linux, or do we need to have the FreeBSD?
That's an interesting question. FreeNAS includes the operating system, which is FreeBSD. You should never really have to touch FreeBSD unless it's an unusual circumstance. So in one case, it doesn't really matter what the operating system is, because all of your operations are via this web interface through a browser. But it's interesting because IX Systems is developing a new version of TrueNAS, which will run on Linux. So when you get it, you'll be able to either pick that it runs on FreeBSD or on Linux. Now, I'm not sure how that, when that's going to filter down to TrueNAS Core, which will be the new name of FreeNAS or not, but eventually I'm going to say it will run on Linux, but it doesn't do today.